Hi everybody, it's Lee. Welcome back to the Shadow Illusions reading channel. Sorry about the major delay. I've been sick for the past 2 weeks. You could probably hear it in my voice. I haven't gotten it back 100% yet, but really wanted to get on with reading. So today we're going to finish chapter 2. Last scene we read from was the first time that Ella and Marco meet. So we are starting on the bottom of page 23. So if you have your copy, feel free to read along. Okay, here we go. I shut the door behind me and sank onto the hallway carpet, my head against the door, my feet stretched out before me, and closed my eyes. Excuse me, would you mind moving your feet? I'm a strong believer in superstition, and if you don't move, I might cause you to stop growing. Although I don't believe that would be a problem in your case. What are you, 5'11"? The voice caught me in its grip. I peeked with one eye at the body that accompanied it. A tall, skinny creature with a fiery set of thick, curly locks was peering down at me, her eyes smiling at my ridiculous appearance. She was carrying 6 heavy-looking grocery bags, 3 in each hand. "Oh, yes," I said, rising from my spot. "Sorry." "I didn't say you had to get out for me. I'm not royalty," she giggled as she walked by. Her grace was absolutely dumbfounding. "Here, allow me to help," I offered, reaching for her bags. "Oh, thanks," she said, and handed me the lightest. I glanced at her awkwardly. "I can carry my own weights, you know, but since you offered to help, I figured I might as well take you up on it," she giggled. "This is insulting," I joked. "All there is in here is a can of tuna and a jug of orange juice." "Exactly," she laughed and moved down off into the hall. I followed her in a trance. "You live here with Martha and Petrie, right?" she asked. For a moment I was startled. Was she talking to me, or was I imagining it? "Marco?" she asked, waving her hand sarcastically in front of my face. "Did you hear me?" She smiled again. I froze. You know my name?" I asked, feeling like a petulant child being handled by an adult. I tried to act my age, but it clearly wasn't working to my advantage. "I know a lot more than just your name. Martha has told me plenty about you," she giggled. I silently cussed at my aunt for speaking about me to a complete stranger, especially one that I was infatuated by. "Is that so?" I asked. "Would you care to share what you know?" "Well, you're 21, you're from Milan, which, may I just say, is absolutely fascinating. You've lived here for a year or so and you work at Petrie's place. Now, I'm sure you're confused why Martha would share all of this with me. You probably don't know that your Aunt Martha and I have tea together 2 times a week, in the afternoon. I taught her how to speak English when she moved here, and she taught me how to make peach strudel." She paused, her eyes widening in a joy at my confusion. "She always speaks very highly of you, Marco," she continued, "whether you realize it or not." She spun around and ambled off as if floating on her own self-confidence. Smart girl, this one. I decided to play along with her little game. Although my aunt had never shared a shred of information with me, I decided to take a few guesses about her. "All I know about you is that your name is Andrea and that you live down the hall. You're an artist, right?" Yes, I am," she smiled. "How did you know that?" "My aunt has one of your paintings in her living room." She continued down the corridor to her apartment. I followed, my mind engulfed in thought. Quite the odd situation, wouldn't you agree? Fate was obviously on my side, although to what extent I was not sure. Standing before me was a girl that I had dreamed about for over a year. She knew several key things about me, yet until this moment we had never met. In a sense, you could say that she knew more about me than most people, thanks of course to my aunt and her big mouth. She unlocked her door and entered. "You can just leave the bag anywhere," she said, as she dropped her own bags on the floor. Her apartment was a mess. It was bigger than the one that I shared with my aunt and uncle, yet the clutter made it seem so much smaller. The kitchen lay to the side of the entry, followed by the living room and a coffee table that was almost invisible under stacks of magazines and books. I dropped the black bag in a state of mild shock. "You live here alone?" I asked. "Yeah, and it's usually much more organized, but my siblings are in from out of town," she explained, "and they've just completely taken over." "Out of town?" "Yeah, they live with my parents back in Louisiana. That's where I'm from," she added. "That's odd. You don't look or talk like a Southerner," I joked. "Well, obviously not. I've lived in New York since I was 16, she said as she approached me, a tall glass of water in her hand. "Here you go," she said, handing me the glass. "Thanks," I said. I guzzled the water like a camel, letting the icy feel of it burn down my throat. "So you've lived here alone for what, 5 years?" "Yeah, it's no big deal. I wanted to be an artist, and there were very few opportunities for me back home, so I came to live with my grandmother until I was 18, and then I moved into my own place." She brushed a strand of hair away from her face and smoothed it casually behind her ear. She looked directly at me the entire time she spoke, which intimidated me. I was not used to being talked to, more like talked at. "Oh, and for your trouble, sir. Here," she said, handing me a dollar bill. "You're joking, right? Because if not, I would be terribly insulted." I pushed it away with my empty hand. "Of course I am. After all you did was carry in a bag of orange juice and tuna. You were really no help at all," she chuckled. I laughed. "Well, if you want to repay me with a favor, you can tell me a little bit more about your artwork," I suggested. "What do you want to know? I thought you'd be more interested in hearing about what else Martha's told me about you," she went on. "Well, that too," I smiled, baring all my teeth. She looked at me, her face twisted into a confused yet comical expression. "Okay then, Mr. Santorini, let's get to know each other," she exclaimed in a rich, booming voice. I shook my head in disbelief. Her eccentric energy was overwhelming. "I'm serious. Sit down and I'll share the rest of your life story with you," she offered as she skipped over to one of the lumps in the living room. She shoved all of the bedding to one end of the couch and slid onto the other end, crossed her legs, and looked up at me to see if I would follow. I did. Our conversation lasted 3.5 hours. That was the beginning of a relationship between me and the woman who would, 6 months later, become my wife. From that day on, we spent every waking moment together, she full of life, I feeding off her energy. Everything she did made me strive to become a better person, a man who would deserve such a partner. We married in October 1961. We had a small wedding, 30 guests, including our families and closest friends. I moved into Andrea's apartment. Without the clutter of siblings, I learned to love the apartment almost as much as I loved her. Her world was displayed for all to see, her art, and so her soul, hung on every wall, her zest for life revealed in every corner. I had walked out of a dark forest called the single lifestyle into a fantasy with 6 large windows and a light, open bedroom. Her apartment became our home, our nest, our life. There can be no way for me to fully convey to you the beauty of our relationship. Our love couldn't be expressed in ordinary words. To tell you that I loved her with all my heart would be an understatement. She was the sun, moon, and stars in my dark life, brought light to a world in which the idea had never existed. She was a canvas covered in every color. Her joy and her simplicity, as well as her pain and her sorrow, were drawn across her face at every moment, hiding nothing, bearing all. We lived in New York for a year and a half after our marriage. I continued to work at the general store. Andrea remained at the art gallery where she had been employed for years. We spent our evenings together after work every night, visiting friends, eating at Martha and Petrie's, or enjoying each other's company in our apartment. Our life was blissful, content, felt that nothing could take away from our happiness. We had decided early on that we would not stay in New York forever. Although the city had become our home, she missed her hometown, and I was looking for change. So in time, we packed up our lives and moved south. She was ecstatic. As much as she loved the busyness of New York, it was her dream to one day return home and build her life there. That was the end of 1962, a time when peace was a distant goal and war was on everyone's minds. The days were thick and greasy with fear, the nights breezy and easygoing. We moved to Roland, Louisiana, a short distance from New Orleans, where Andrea's family lived. We traveled by bus to visit them every couple of weeks until we had the money to afford a car of our own, and then we were there practically every day. I set up a small diner in the main square district of our neighborhood, the perfect way for me to disappear into my own world every day. Running a business made the other pressures in life seem easy and harmless. Andrea rented out a studio with the money that she had made at her job in New York and began giving art classes to locals. We became embedded in the community, guests at every dinner table in the county, a helping hand to neighbors, and a friend to everyone in need to everyone around. Moving to Louisiana gave us a chance to settle into our marriage as well into our minds and bodies. We were content with everything we had, just as it was given to us. Nothing more, nothing less. Life was simple, carefree, peaceful. That illusion was quickly shattered. On September 20th, 1987, Andrea was murdered, and I, buried in my sorrow, left the world like the murderer that I had become. I stared at the floor. Ella had seized her hair in her fists and was tugging at it in an effort to pull it all out. Her eyes were bloodshot and open wide, and tears were streaming uncontrollably down her face. Her sheer nylon tights had tears on the side. Her white button-down shirt was crumpled as she swayed back and forth, her skirt moving steadily with the beats of her fists. She looked deranged. Even worse, she looked exactly as Sarah had only moments before as they wheeled her out on a stretcher. The case was obviously not doing much for these women's sanities or their looks. Ella, calm down, please. Crying isn't going to help. I did not I did not reach out to stroke her hair or cuddle her in my arms. I don't think it had anything to do with the religious boundaries between us, but rather with the pure shock of the situation that kept me scared stiff and in my place. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Ella kept repeating to herself in a forced whisper. She was staring at the wall in front of her, as if talking to the ghost of a woman who had just stood before her, blaming her for the actions she did not commit. You're all crazy, Danny muttered. He was already in a chair at the other end of the room. The sudden frenzy had only flustered him for a moment, and he was back where he had been before Sarah's scene. He stuck his hand into his pocket, pulled out a cigarette, and slipped it between his lips. Danny, if you want to smoke, go outside, please, Detective Carlson said evenly. He ran his palm up and down the middle of his forehead. To me, he seemed like an unlikely wreck for a cop. Ella tried to relax her body between bouts of tears. After every deep sob came a long, long exhale and a heavy sigh. But as hard as she tried, nothing would help. The tears continued to flow down her face. The fit soon turned into hiccups, erratic explosions of anger that popped loudly from her. She folded her legs in front of her and buried her face in her knees. At last she stopped crying and just sat there. An unsteady breathing pattern replaced her tears, which seemed to be louder than the crying had been. I looked up at the detective, then rose from the floor, moved to where Danny was sitting, and sat down. I'm so embarrassed, she said after a long silence. For what? I asked. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, Ella. We all know that you're innocent. Because, she whispered, I really shouldn't have reacted like that. I know I'm innocent. I didn't do anything. I guess that I just got so caught up in the moment that I let everything Sarah said get to me, she added. Her face suddenly reminded me of an old, intelligent woman rather than a stupid 23-year-old. I cannot believe that she would go as far as to blame me for this. You definitely overreacted, Carlson said soothingly. I think we all did. Well, at least as soothingly as he could when you consider that he looked as though he wanted to strangle her there and then. Ella has been the biggest hindrance in this case. She believes with all her heart that she knew Sam better than anyone else. She also thinks that she was the only witness who knew him personally. She arrived in town only a few weeks before Sam was murdered, so I can hardly understand this belief. Her connection to Sam and her superiority over the rest of us has made it almost impossible to get through to her without an emotional torrent. Not that Sarah was right to go around pointing fingers, of course, but still, it's a headache. Ella cannot understand that there are people like me or Carlson who knew and cared deeply about the man. He meant more to this community than she could ever imagine. The pain that I felt in connection to his death was not something that she or any of the other witnesses can comprehend. It wouldn't hurt you to look through his personal belongings again, I said, surprising even myself, unable to control my urge to speak. Oh? Carlson said dryly. Do you think, Mr. Santorini, that we haven't thought about that before? We've looked through Mr. Knightley's belongings several times now, and we found nothing of substance to this case. Maybe you're overlooking something, Ella said. Ella, he said sternly, would you like to look through Sam's belongings and see if you find anything? Would you allow me to? She asked earnestly. Of course not! You're not the detective here! He barked, and she jumped back in fear. Well, maybe you should stop acting like such a wuss and start acting like the detective you say you are, Danny exclaimed. Watch your mouth, Mr. Michaels, or you might end up just like Sarah, he shouted. What's that supposed to mean? Danny demanded, alarmed. Oh, I think you know exactly what that means, young man. Now sit down and shut up. The three of us stared at him in disbelief. What did you do to her? Ella finally asked. He stared at her for what seemed like hours before he said, Nothing. I did absolutely nothing. That's why she's in the hospital now, because I didn't do anything to stop the others from breaking her down. He seemed ashamed of his sloppy tactics and shocked by the amount of emotion that he had allowed to creep into the case. Sam Knightley had been a close friend of Detective Carlson. They had met when he first arrived in Roland over 6 years ago. After high school, Sam had decided to leave his world behind and travel the world. He had not meant to end up here, but, like most of us who grew into the southern earth, been drawn to the beauty and peaceful atmosphere of Roland County. He had dreamed of living a bigger life than this, but his dreams had been turned into tumbleweed, and so he settled here instead. They were both children at the time, each with strange fears of the future, engaged in endless battles of survival within themselves. I often studied them as young men. Even as they grew older, their friendship and their bond continued to grow. Carlson had been born and raised in Roland County, and after graduating from the police academy in New Orleans, decided to come home. Sam's first apartment had been around the corner from his parents' home, which was on the same block as mine. Sam was a scrawny young man with deep blue eyes and fair skin. He was of medium height and weight and had a slight limp when he walked. Football accident, he explained when I asked him about his distinct gait. After all, Sam's first job had been working for me. Football? I asked, confused. He chuckled. Oh, soccer, as you Americans put it, he had explained, his heavy British accent running through the words. I often had to remind him that, although Roland had become my home, I in no way considered myself an American. Sam made friends with everyone, everywhere he went. There was not a single time when we were together that he did not end up attracting people to him like a magnet. He was a brilliant scholar of the arts, a warrior of the world, a true hero to those who knew him. He and I did not share beliefs. When he finally quit, it was not long before Sam found himself running the cafe down the street, the only real competition I had in town. I was furious, but I understood. We were not enemies. The world feels empty without him. I rose from my chair and reached for the cane leaning against the wall. I had not used it when I rushed over to Sarah's side, and then again when I sat by Ella. As I reached over to balance on it, I regretted my decision to brave walking without it. I struggled to get over to Ella. Can I get you a glass of water? I asked. She was still on the floor, legs glued to it. Sure. Thanks, Marco, she whispered, her head still on her knees. Danny? Carlson? I asked, turning toward Danny and then toward me. Sure, Marco. Thanks. No, thank you, Mr. Santorini, Carlson said. Please come back right away so we can continue. I want to speak to you in private next. He fidgeted with the bottom of his jacket until it was in place. We're going to be here forever, Danny moaned. No, we're not, Ella said, a hint of determination in her voice. We'll only be here a little while longer, and then everything will be fine. It sounded a shade too optimistic. She forced herself to smile, a cheesy, overrated smile. Okay, Ella, whatever you say, Danny muttered, rolling his eyes dramatically. He scratched the right side of his face, stretched his arms up as if reaching toward the sky for a heavenly sign. I looked around the room at the people, and I wondered, what had Sam Knightley done wrong in his lifetime that we had been chosen to avenge his blood? End of chapter 2. Hope you guys enjoyed. You can find all the information about Shattered Illusions on the website, Facebook, and Twitter, and Blogger and Tumblr. All the links are below in the comments. Also, if you would like to own your own copy of Shattered Illusions, it's available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and on the official website where I sell signed copies. All of those links are down there as well. Okay, everybody, it's been real, it's been fun, it's been real fun. Bye!